Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to The Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. O tēnā koutou katoa. Everyone, it's great to have you on The Hoon here on the Kaka. I'm Bernard Hickey, co-host, with Peter Bale, co-host.
It's very good to see you. It was very nice to see you yesterday in my little house and to drop you off at the ferry. Did you make the right ferry to get home to Waiheke at the time?
I did, and managed to stay nice and dry.
Excellent.
And it was a very efficient trip. Thank you very much.
Very good. Anytime.
And one of the reasons I was in there was to just work with you on the final story on a fascinating interview that we've done, which we are replaying in today's Hoon, an interview with someone you've known for a long time. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it's an unusual thing, and I was thinking about poor old Simon, our editor, having to splice it all together. So our audience will find this somewhat unusual in that we've done a pre-recorded interview, which is going to be the bulk of the Hoon today. We're not going to have Professor Patman, and we're not going to have Catherine Dyer, but we have Michael Wolff, the well-known American author, who has just published his fourth book on Donald Trump, which is called All or Nothing: How Trump Recaptured America. And I've mentioned him a couple of times before, particularly since I was listening to the audiobook of him reading it, which is a great way to do it because his sardonic, sarcastic tone really comes across when he's reading it himself. Yeah, I've known him maybe 15 years, nearly 20 years or something. We got to know each other as he was doing research for his Murdoch book, which now that I recall it was an extraordinary phase because weirdly, Michael and Rupert started looking more and more and more like each other. And it was sort of, it was a sort of strange kind of reverse Dorian Gray going on there, that they both started looking like each other and looking older. Of course, that book exploded, and was, he had extraordinary access to Rupert Murdoch in that year or so working on that book, and it was very soon cut off when they realised what kind of author Michael was, which they would have only had to look at anything he'd written to know that he is not somebody who is a patsy. He does bite the hand that feeds him, and he's sarcastic, sardonic, and an absolutely beautiful writer. So we have about a 45-minute interview with him. He's got this. He's tapped into all of our weird fascination with Trump, and he says, Trump is motivated solely by himself, his singularity, his desire to dominate and to be the next headline and the last headline and the headlines for tomorrow. But we went a bit wider. Yeah, go ahead, Bernard.
That's what struck me in the discussion was this idea that Trump is the ultimate narcissist, the ultimate me guy, and he's running the world's largest superpower and economy for a second time around. And it's one of those, we all shake our heads going, how the hell did that happen? Well, this interview with Michael Wolff gives us a bit of an insight into how and why it happened, but also just the sheer unusualness of Trump.
Yes,
and
the
he's a bit of a one-off.
As I had to look it up, of course, but it was, Michael uses the phrase sui generis to say that, Trump is one of a kind, and he really is. Also interesting from a political perspective or a forecast perspective, not that Michael would not describe himself as a political journalist. He is a writer, and the book is very writerly, and his approach is very writerly. He believes that, was his view, that Trumpism will die with Donald Trump, that we, in a sense, have to wait him out, which is a little bit like some of the Democratic political analysts like James Carville are saying, the Democrats just have to play dead while Trump is there and let him fall into his own hole. But, Michael does believe that Trump will explode because he always does. And he also believes that everyone around him, anyone who gets close to him, is ultimately burned and shunned. So that's his prediction for Musk. But I think also, Bernard, we covered, like, as I say, he isn't a political journalist. He would never describe himself as a sort of political creature. So this is not a book that does, here's what the Democrats are doing and here's what the Republicans are doing and here's what Trump's doing. And nor does it say, on the 3rd of July at 10 a.m. I spoke to these people, and these people. It's mostly unsourced, but it's incredibly well sourced. And we talked to him about this, and he was not defensive, but he was quite aggressive actually in pushing against the idea from what he calls the Church of Journalism, that he's a little bit too fast and loose. And he said, I just got this quote that I just took off the transcript just now. Michael says, I'm interested in how people breathe. I'm interested in how people smell. I'm interested in what the experience of being with these people or the experience of being these people is. And these are writerly interests. I think if most political reporters said, are you interested in politics or writing? They would say politics. They're not writers. And I think this is what makes them so compelling and so interesting. The scenes of abject sycophancy at Mar-a-Lago and the ghastliness of Mar-a-Lago and the fawning yes people that he describes. One is marvelous. Natalie Harp, who is a young woman in the Trump woman mold, which Michael talks about both in the book and in our interview, of these weird identikit kind of Fox News type women who fill his life. And Natalie Harp is on the golf course with him in her own golf cart, carrying a battery-powered printer in order to print out for him fawning emails and to send him what amount to love notes as well. So there's some lovely insight into the sort of absolute gruesomeness of what it is to be in Trump's circle.
Well, on that note, let's hear from the man himself, a discussion that we had with Michael Wolff on Wednesday morning.
Yeah, let's go. Thank you. Now, Michael, it's great to have you on the show. You and I, we should disclose, are friends of quite some years, since the time you were working on your books about the Murdochs. But today we're going to talk to you about Donald J. Trump, and your new book, All or Nothing, How Trump Recaptured America. It's your fourth book on the Donald, although others, of course, including the ones about Fox, have touched on him and you've written about him in the past. How does it feel to have written four now? And I presume you're working hard on the fifth.
It feels like I've written too many books about Donald Trump.
Yeah, but he's a compelling character.
And I am trying to resist, let's put it this way, working on a fifth.
Yeah, but as Ben Mullen said about your, no, it wasn't Ben Mullen, sorry. As Ben Smith said, I think, about your books, that they had finally given you the amount of money that you'd always lived on, or the style to which you've always lived. So there must be a compelling reason, not only in the story, but it's hard to pull yourself away from this particular ambulance, isn't it?
Well, yes, both because the story goes on. I mean, I wish it did not go on, but it continues to go on. So that there is reason to tell it, and also it's Donald Trump, so nobody really pays attention to anything else. So if you're a writer of books, it is a propitious subject.
Yeah, it is like watching something on fire. He's the arsonist, but he's also surrounded by the fire.
Yeah, you can that metaphor or the train wreck, because I continue to believe that it will finally smash into something that it
in your first book
through.
In your first book on him, in Fire and Fury, you talked about the surprise and shock, really, between him and also Melania about the fact that they actually won. How do you think he's kind of processed that, if that's true? Of course, if your perception at the beginning in Fire and Fury was correct, how's he processed this extraordinary ability to turn it into success?
Just let me clarify. It was not my perception. It was the perception of everyone, and not just their perception. It was the accepted wisdom of everyone, including Donald Trump.
That he did, that
Yes,
he wouldn't win.
This is, I would say, this is incontrovertible. They absolutely did not believe that they would win, and there was, by the way, no reason to believe that they would win.
And so they did, and then they have again. So just how do we go from that extraordinary sort of sense of surprise and shock to this compelling determination to stay in, right up to the point of denying the outcome of the 2020
in some sense,
election?
I think that he got hoisted here. I don't think he ever wanted to be the president of the United States. I think that's actually irrelevant or tangential to the goals that he had. But once he did become the president of the United States, that then became indistinguishable from being Donald Trump. So in order to go on being Donald Trump, which is the goal, he had to be the president of the United States, or had to continue to run for the presidency.
So is he effectively, do you see him as constantly reinventing what it is to be Donald Trump and constantly playing that act?
Actually, the exact opposite. What Donald Trump is stays as a constant. The fact that he became the president is a kind of is just a it's just like changing real estate. So the guy in the White House in 2017 was and for the next 4 years was really no different from the guy in Trump Tower. The guy in Mar-a-Lago was no different from the guy in the White House, and here we are again. So the fixed point always is Donald Trump. And so that interesting thing of which everybody says, history says, the indisputable point of presidential history is that the presidency changes whoever holds it. This is not true about Donald Trump.
In the book, Michael, you describe a somewhat more disciplined campaign than he had in the past under Susie Wiles, although you also go into fabulous detail about the machinations and bitchiness in there. You also talk about a couple of personalities, or at least a couple of your excerpts, and the start of the book, I guess, highlights the role of a rather extraordinary person called Natalie Harp, who carries the print around on her back, in fact, in order to give him whatever the latest morsel of news. And also Boris Epstein, a Russian-born lawyer who seemed to really drive the legal strategy, but a bit like a shopping cart with a broken wheel.
Yeah, it's just, Trump lives in this world of his own making, this bubble world, if you will. His reality is different from everyone else's reality, and this is sustained by yes people, people who tell him absolutely what he wants to hear, and who are talented enough in this, if in no other regard, to know exactly what he wants to hear. Now, the amazing thing is having living in that separate reality, he is able, by force of will and repetition and media brilliance, to convince everyone else that reality is a at the very least a plausible one.
Yeah, I keep coming back when when I listen to you reading the book on the audio version, the idea of Trump world, and this is a world that they were living in Mar-a-Lago for a while, but boy, we are living in it now, even down here in New Zealand. It is a really bizarre sort of alternative reality, but it is his reality.
There's one point in the book where to one of the Trump people, I refer to this as Mar-a-Lago as Trump's Camelot, and this person, very close to Trump, hesitated, and then he said, maybe more Jonestown.
Yeah, which was the site of the invention of the concept of drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Mm. Yeah, so we're all living in that world. I mean, in the book, you talk, or quote him as saying that our legal strategy is our media strategy, and our media strategy is our legal strategy, which is to say that the more he talked about his cases, the less important or the less possible they became. He was able to give the impression that he was a victim of lawfare. Is chaos the strategy now, and is strategy the chaos? Is the strategy chaos?
I would. Headlines are the strategy, whether that's chaos or not, and that can certainly seem like chaos. And because today's headlines are obviated by the next day's headlines, I guess that is a form of chaos. But central to this is headlines. He needs to dominate every news cycle, every headline. So the New York Times, if you read that on a daily basis, which some of us still do, every headline is a Trump headline. I mean, when you see a headline that's not related to Donald Trump, you go, "Oh, this is what's this doing here? How can that possibly be important?" And that's what he needs. That's what he lives for. That's the entire point of the process.
And so does that suggest that there is a cabal behind him, beside him, beneath him, around him, who are actually in charge and actually directing some of these very bold, crazy, some would say, changes in policy? You know, there's a hard policy underpinning to that hunger for the next headline.
I don't think that there is a hard policy underpinning that. I think it is simply the headlines. It's simply getting up in the morning and saying, what's our headline or our series of headlines for the day? And again, they may be reversed or thrown out or replaced the next day. Now, that doesn't mean that headlines don't have an effect. They do have an effect. You can, I think, probably come up with a plausible theory about Trump governing by headlines, but that's different from governing by policy or agenda or. Yeah, but is somebody else driving? I mean,
during the election, Michael, he denied really basically anything to do with Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation and others. But in the end, many of those policies are in fact being carried out. Tariffs, he clearly he's heavily influenced, it would seem, by Lighthizer and Peter Navarro. There's real policy. I mean, even if he is a policy, not the opposite of a policy wonk, there's really hard policies behind that.
It's important, and tariffs are a good example. Yes, tariffs today, no tariffs tomorrow. So tariffs are literally the headline, and what will become of those tariffs today, tomorrow, a week from now, we have no idea. So you can't really say that there's policy, that policy exists when we have no idea actually what the policy outcome will be.
There's a very interesting one of those running now, and I know you're not a normal, inverted commas, political correspondent sort of sitting in Washington watching every snippet of this, but it's increasingly being talked about the idea of something called the Mar-a-Lago Accords, which, like the Plaza Accords that it partly takes its names from, is an alleged strategy to weaken the dollar and change the position of American international debt. That would require a pretty extraordinary amount of sort of policy work that
but
he would appear to be incapable of.
I'm telling you here, trust me, do not believe that. I mean, there's a lot of conversations that go on, and conversations within the Trump White House. There's a clear dichotomy. There's what's on Trump's mind, and then the conversations everybody else have been having. And the fact that there is not necessarily a connection there means that the conversations everybody else the conversations that everyone else has been having are either meaningless or involve something that Trump doesn't care about.
And so does that mean he's not, in fact, a kind of weird puppet being driven by more intelligent people like Lutnick and Besant and Musk, for example.
Absolutely, categorically, and I can't say this emphatically enough, not at all. Matter of fact, let me be perfectly clear. He's not listening to those people. They have never actually spoken to him. They've listened to him. They have never spoken to him. They have never gotten 2 consecutive sentences out in his presence.
Fantastic. Bernard has a question he'd like to ask you, which refers back to the book and to the Butler assassination attempt.
Yeah, Michael, from down here, the big event of the whole re-election campaign seems to us, the assassination attempt. How important was it, and sort of what impact did it have on Trump himself?
I think it was a tangentially important event. I mean, it was important at that moment in time, shocking at that moment in time. I think it shocked him. It certainly rallied a level of support around him. But within weeks after, it seemed to no longer have an effect on him, which is also kind of astounding to be shot and then to be able to pass through that without it having an existential impact. And in the news cycles to come, largely forgotten, which he was bitter about. They've taken my assassination. So it was again that it fit into the pattern of all Trump events, that it's eclipsed by other events.
Did it take him closer towards God? I mean, he's referred several times to God having a mission for him and having saved him.
It assuredly did not. But I do think it gave him a moment of pause, and people in the campaign thought that there was a marked difference for a period about Donald Trump. But again, that passed rather quickly.
Michael, I'm curious about Trump's personality, if you like, and whether he enjoys being president again, and whether he feels like this is a fun thing.
Yeah, well, I've always thought he actually enjoyed being at Mar-a-Lago rather than in the White House. But the presidency becomes necessary to who he is, and it delivers many things for him that he needs and wants, which is to say, attention. Trump wants attention. What is this about? Attention, 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 attention. He was able to get that at Mar-a-Lago and also fit in every day 18 holes of golf. So that's perfect. But he could not. And this was, there was some consideration on his part about whether that would be sustainable without running for president. And then he basically decided it would not be. The prospect of someone else becoming the actual or even titular head of the Republican Party was not sustainable in the Trump narrative.
It also shields him somewhat from legal danger, because one of the things that comes across
that was the other thing as the legal train came at him. He decided, okay, that was a workable defense for him. He would run for president and then therefore say all of these legal attacks were political attacks. I mean, that was a very precise understanding on his part.
And he clearly had a very visceral fear of literally turning up in jail.
Well, I think as everyone would, but his fear was not like everyone else's fear. Everyone else's fear in the face of criminal indictments, and in the case of 4 separate criminal trials, would have given up literally everybody, every other politician. That would have ended their careers, and every other person, and I think this is literally every other person in the nation, would have been on their knees looking for a deal to make. Not Donald Trump.
And does that give you some? There's a sort of. I mean, I think you do refer to him as a genius of sorts in the book. Does that give you a kind of weird, grudging respect, like watching King Kong climbing up the Empire State?
Yeah, I don't know if that would be. I mean, what it does clarify is that he is not like you or me or anyone else we have ever known.
Hanging over the book, hanging throughout the book, and I guess to some extent hanging over the presidency, is Melania. You create her as a rather spectral figure, but a figure that perhaps is the only person he might literally fear. What's the Melania? Describe how you write about Melania in the book, or the impact that she has.
Well, I mean, she didn't make one campaign appearance until the final week. She didn't show up for any of his myriad courtroom appearances. She's, I know of only one trip that she took on the campaign plane, and that was just merely to be dropped off at some other place. And at one point I said to one of the people, again, it was someone very close to Trump, I was just trying to figure out the nature of this relationship, the nature of the politics here, just kind of, trying to impose some logic on this. And this person suddenly, kind of reared back, looked at me like I was a complete moron. And he said, "What are you talking about? She hates his fucking guts." And again, that was one of those journalistic moments in which you realize, what's in front of your face is what's true. And I think that's another one of these kind of Trumpian things that no one can quite explain or fit into the conventional assumptions and understanding. Obviously, they have a marriage that conforms to no middle class standards at all. It is a marriage that doesn't really exist, or a marriage on a pure transactional basis, and why this is not called out as such, why this is not itself a major story, I don't know. It's a failing, again, a journalistic failing, just because we don't have the language to describe this or qualify it in any way.
Michael, we're sitting down here agog over the last few years thinking, surely it's going to end now. Surely he's gone way past the point of public acceptance, or there's some legal issue which means that he can't go any further. But he just seems to confound everyone. How is this going to end? I mean, what are the potential pathways?
I mean, it's going to end in the obvious way. He's going to come to the limits of his term, and at 78 years old, he's going to come to the limits of his life. So at that point, we will be able to exit from this story, and it will not go on post-Trump. It is not going to go on with J.D. Vance. It's not going to go on with any of these other schmedricks. Trump is truly sui generis. There is no one like him. No one is going to be able to do this again. And we will at some point, and there will be all sorts of damage and wreckage in his wake. But nevertheless, we will at the point in which he exit, return to some relatively familiar baseline.
And what I can't understand from watching this from a distance is how the Republican Party became so captured by Trump, and why there hasn't been a pushback. Where are the grown-ups here to stop the chaos?
Well, I think, politicians are politicians. If you want a career in Republican politics, at this point in time, there is only one way to do that. Then that's fealty to Donald Trump. There is literally no other option. How that happened, that happened for a combination of the failures, the previous failures of the Republican Party, a shift in the interests of the Republican base, a failure of the Republican leadership to connect with that base, and then Donald Trump's ability to channel that base. And so the Republican Party is left out in the cold, and Donald Trump steps in to be the one person who can put together this and keep together this odd lot coalition.
Is Marco Rubio a good example of that? When you said there's only one show in town and you have to abase yourself before it. It is interesting watching Marco Rubio, not that he necessarily has much body language, but he looked uncomfortable in that weird Zelensky confrontation. Is he a good example of somebody who's...
He's a good example, but the full leadership of congressional leadership of the Republican Party falls into that too. There's really nobody who has deviated from that.
And we talked a bit about motivations, and the motivation you were describing was just the headlines, prominence, me. In your first book, not your first book on him, in Fire and Fury, you had to describe a dinner, I think, or at least some of it came from a dinner you hosted at home with Roger Ailes and Steve Bannon. It was an extraordinary thing. My recollection of you telling me about it is that you were cooking, but you were also trying to take notes and record it as it went. That just sounded like a remarkable sort of discharge of information, like a rain shower.
It was an extraordinary and I think largely unintended evening. And I certainly remember saying to my wife, guess who's coming to dinner?
In that, you talk about Ailes having Roger Ailes, who's the founder, of course, for Rupert Murdoch of Fox News, and you say the people who Fox is for live in 1965, before the Voting Rights Act. So is that what MAGA is? A kind of 1960s finned cars and white people being in charge and black people knowing where they belonged?
Yeah, I think so. I think Roger was, Roger's smart about many things, but he was particularly, I think, prescient in his understanding about that. And he said there are two effective cultures. And he said, your culture, meaning mine, you live in, I think that was in 2016. That was when we had this conversation. And my people, or the Fox audience, lives in 1965. And it's just the different pace of culture. And I think that was a sort of a superior understanding of media and audiences. And then it turned out to be also a keen political understanding.
And Steve Bannon was the kind of slightly grubby, weird, alcohol-infused looking guy who seemed to be driving, if there was any policy behind Trump won. How influential does he remain, either in the present or just his ideas? I listen to his rather mad podcast once or twice a week, because I think he does 2 a day, and it's barely listenable. But how influential is Steve Bannon, either in legacy or in actuality?
Well, I don't think Steve has a lot of ideas. He has a lot of he has a point of view about disruption and a message about disruption. And that is, occasionally influential in MAGA circles. Trump doesn't really have any contact with Steve. I think in my current book, there's a scene that I have in which they're together, but that's really was the first time in like 7 years. But nevertheless, Steve is a voice in the sort of among the most vociferous MAGA opportunists.
Michael, one of the big differences in this campaign and now in this presidency of Trump is Elon Musk. Can you explain what's going on there, that relationship, and whether it'll last?
Well, I think 2 points. No relationship with Donald Trump lasts. None. 100% of them end in humiliation, public firings, indictment, in tears in some fashion. But Elon actually is relevant to Bannon, although they hate each other, because Elon really has the Bannon role. They both have Time magazine covers as the real president or the president's brain or whatever that is. They are both the kind of designated disruptors. Both the guys people hate more than they hate Trump, if that's possible. And at any rate, Steve lasted for 6 months, and I think that's probably a fairly good measure for Elon.
Just one of the theories people have, at least here, is that Trump will pivot once the economy, falls over, or the markets really slump, or his approval ratings get hit. Maybe it's the Musk Doge stuff that does it. Do you think Trump this time around cares or would pivot if he sees that he's unpopular?
Yes. He'll pivot toward whatever the headlines need to be.
And they cannot be the S&P falling.
Yes, it will always be whatever the headline. The headline is not necessarily a reversal. Sometimes it's a doubling down. But the mindset is what is needed to take the headlines. A falling stock market, if it falls too much, that's going to get the headlines rather than him. This is a very important thing. It's not really the event, it's him. When October 7th happened, his immediate and visceral response was that was going to take attention from him. And he was pissed.
Michael, Bernard and I sometimes talk on this show about media, the state of media, and so on. You've faced tremendous criticism from various, what you and I have discussed, or I always quote you as describing as the church of journalism. Your books tend to be, and this one is no different, very sweeping, doesn't have a huge index or dates and days and sources. Which has also led me to describe you as Tom Wolff rather than Michael Wolff in some respects, or in terms of style. What's your answer to those who see you giving the sweep, but without necessarily maybe the kind of forensic discipline that somebody like Bob Woodward might put in there?
Well, first thing, I don't think Bob Woodward does anything different than I do. The only thing difference between Bob Woodward's approach and method and mine, and because Bob also allows a range of anonymous sources, is that I'm a significantly better writer than Bob Woodward is. That's just one area, but the other area is, people who write for newspapers do, and that is the church of journalism is basically reduced to newspaper people and broadcast news people who somehow, because of their own the flatulence of their own work have had to create themselves as serious people. That is completely mystifying to me. But at any rate, what they do is just different than what I do. I'm a writer who is writing about politics. I'm not a political reporter. I'm writing about these incredible stories and these incredible characters.
It is about characters, because you're I mean, all of the books, but I think possibly this one even more than the other four that I've read. And of course, there's the Murdoch book. You put people in the room or on the terrace at Mar-a-Lago, and in all its horror and glitz and tackiness.
Yeah, I'm interested in how people breathe. I'm interested in how people smell. I'm interested in what the experience of being with these people, or the experience of being these people are. And these are writerly interests. I mean, I think if most political reporters, if you said, "Are you is you're interested in politics or in writing?" they would say politics. They're not writers. And I think it's an important distinction. They are not real writers. And I am. And, there's a structural thing here. I come out of the magazine business, or an era of the magazine business, when it was dominated by people writing the way, with the goals that I have: character, scenes, experience. But that went away. Magazines went away. There is no magazine business anymore.
Is that style rooted in what I think was in what Tom Wolff would have called the new journalism?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, I think that was a very significant movement in writing, but a significant movement in understanding the political world also, and a key aspect of our understanding, which is, as I say, no longer really exists.
I was really struck, Mike. I've got a couple more questions on this, and then I want to ask you a final question, but in a minute. Or as Bernard will probably say, our final question as we get to. The Trump quote about you was, he called me many times trying to set up a meeting, but I never called him back because I don't want to give him the credibility of an interview. Others in the administration were also called. They reported his calls and likewise did not talk to him. I assume, however, he was able to speak to a small number of people, but not meaningfully. The book suggests otherwise. And also, does that quote not suggest that, in fact, you were right in there? You did have access.
Of course,
information flowing to you, rather.
I mean, of course it does.
Is that going to be a tagline or a blurb on the book?
I suppose it will. As a matter of fact, when that was seconds after he posted that, someone in the White House sent me that link with the message, "You're welcome!" exclamation point.
And White House Communications Director Stephen Chung, who seems a very unsavory character, described you as a, quote, lying in an official statement as a lying sack of shit who routinely fabricates stories originating from his sick, warped imagination, only possible because he has a severe and debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome that has rotted his peanut-sized brain.
Yes, I know it well. And but it's also interesting, almost the verbatim boilerplate they used a year ago against Bob Woodward. So they're really not very good at this kind of invective. But let me defend Stephen Chung for a moment, because he actually in life is a nice guy. He's sort of been treated, he should be the press secretary. But he's not, because he weighs 400 pounds. So Trump, in the Trump world, that would just not be possible.
Yeah, you describe, actually, it is interesting. Without you do describe a kind of identikit Fox Trump woman who he's surrounded by interchangeably.
Yeah, no, all of, it's kind of I mean, seeing them together, which you did at his trial in New York, is a kind of I don't know, a fetishistic moment. They all look alike. They all kind of look. I mean, there's a sort of continuum from Melania or perhaps Ivanka. Does Melania look like Ivanka, or Ivanka look like Melania? Through all of the women who surround him, or who are all, they always wear their hair down 100% of the time. Short skirt, pardon me, short skirts. In winter, high boots. I mean, all within a very narrow weight range. It's kind of well, you can't miss it.
Mm. And Michael, it would be wrong to talk to you without asking you about Rupert Murdoch. I mean, I think you described him to me once as the story who keeps on giving, because of course that you had tremendous access directly to Rupert and his family for that book. You were then cast out into outer darkness as a result of it. But the Murdoch-Trump relationship is extremely interesting. I think you described him in Fire and Fury as describing Trump as a fucking idiot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those, I think the bitter, among the most bitter ironies of Rupert's life. I mean, his dream was to elect a U.S. president, and that tragically for him turned out to be Donald Trump.
And so you wrote a book last year, or published a book last year, I think, or maybe year before, called The Fall, which was about the end of the Murdoch empire and conceivably the end of Fox as we knew it. Are you still holding to that idea?
Yeah, no. I mean, Fox is in the process. Obviously, the family is now just divvying it up.
Okay, and Vladimir Putin, what's your do you have an analysis or a thought about the relationship, such as it might be, between Putin and Trump?
No, I mean, I think this is one of the what's in front of your face kinds of situations. Obviously there's a relationship, a quid pro quo, something there that we don't know about. I remember in I think 2019 when Trump went to Helsinki to meet with Putin. And then they did this news conference afterwards, which I watched with Steve Bannon, and Bannon was like his eyes bulging out. He said, "Look at that! Look at Trump! What? He's like a whipped dog." And then Bannon speculated, what must Putin have on Trump? And I mean, I have no idea, but obviously there is something there that is unexplained.
Michael, just one last one from me about the process of following these amazing characters around. Were you ever surprised or impressed? Whenever I've covered politics, there's always been something about someone who, may have a bad reputation or a very, like a caricature, but underneath there's something really interesting or impressive about them. In this last campaign, were you ever surprised and impressed by anyone or anything?
Well, I mean, a lot of the people around Trump, I mean, I've known them for a long time now, and I like them. I think that they are very clear-eyed about the experience that they've had, and obviously I'm appreciative that they share it with me, and I guess, but I guess it does remain surprising that these people in this Trump bubble world can step out of it and look at it and be as amazed by it as all of us. But I think maybe your question is, did I find anything impressive about Donald Trump? I find things amazing about Donald Trump. I mean, I think his absolute transparency is in political terms almost inexplicable. I mean, what you see is what you get. That is Donald Trump. There's no more, there is no less. What he thinks is what he says. I'm not sure that we've ever seen that kind of a person without any kind of artifice like that in public life.
So he really is Peter Sellers in being there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of that. I mean, not exactly, because in the Peter Sellers character, we come to believe that he is saying something meaningful, even if it is not meaningful. I'm not sure we feel that about Trump. I think that we think, oh, that guy's saying just whatever comes into his head, and it doesn't mean anything. And thank God nobody is pretending anymore, as all politicians do on myriad levels.
Michael, I've always been struck by you as a kind of always-on journalist, but also in the background you have a young family. You have other children from the past. How do you think of them growing up in this
grandchildren too? I now have 4 grandchildren.
Congrats.
How do you have a sort of view of the outlook for them in this environment, or will it all pass and everything will be okay eventually?
Well, presumes things are ever okay, which I guess I tend to be an optimistic person, and yes, and so I tend to believe this too will pass, only to bring on something else that will in turn pass.
Michael, is there anything we haven't asked you that we should have, that you're thinking they're thinking, these twits?
This is a question that in itself is often asked of me, and I should prepare an answer, but I don't have an answer. I think you've done a fantastic
Thank you very
job.
much, Michael. Thanks. Thanks, Bernard.
No, thank you very much, Michael. It's a fascinating discussion, and we're very lucky to have a chance to talk to you. And it's a real thrill to have you on the Hoon, which in New Zealand is a great chat between friends. So thank you for being on the show.
Bernard, what was your key takeaway from that?
That Trump is so different to anything else before and after it. And we just have to sort of hunker down and hope that he doesn't destroy the world in the meantime. And it is painful, particularly this time, because he's come in with a whole bunch of new people who are ready this time to have a crack. And we're seeing all sorts of extraordinary things happening. The stuff that we're hearing that's trickling out about people in the United States being shackled in ICE jails, and just in the last couple of days in the media world, the closure or the defunding of Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, the attack in various ways on all sorts of media freedoms and those people who are trying to report on Trump. It really is a different style of presidency from anything else, but also from his own presidency because of that preparation and the laundry list of targets to go for.
Yeah, so I would say that, Michael is an unusual reporter, but writer. Michael is an unusual writer, but the insight that one gets from that book could not be gotten another way, I don't believe. You kind of feel at the table, and he has been at the table at various times in the past. I think he's kind of persona non grata in the Trump world, but it's also very clear that he is still connected in there. And, it's somebody in that circle recently described it as like Jonestown, which of course was the Jonestown massacre, where the religious leader gave everybody Kool-Aid, which is where the expression "drinking the Kool-Aid" comes from. So it is a cult. I was very amused in one aspect, Bernard, when we talked about the White House communications director, Stephen Chung, describing Michael as a lying sack of shit who routinely fabricates stories originating from his sick and warped imagination. And Michael said, apart from Stephen Chung weighing 400 pounds, that he was actually a really nice guy.
Yeah. Actually, that was one of the other takeaways from that interview, is just the importance that Trump world places on physical appearance.
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of obvious, but now that it's laid out, and, heaven help you if you don't look good on TV.
Yeah, well, it is, as we know, the Foxification of the presidency is pretty extraordinary. You had, in the last presidency, the former chief executive of Fox went into the White House. You had you had Tucker Carlson before he was fired. You had Sean Hannity, talking to the president far more than he probably should have. Now you've got, the defense secretary, the transport secretary are all from Fox. Trump proposed at one point, according to the book, having Maria Bartiromo, the money honey from Fox Business, as vice president. So, it's a bonkers world. And I think one telling aspect, if we remember Roger Ailes, who was the rather appalling founder of Fox News for Rupert Murdoch, and he once told Michael that the people who Fox is for live in 1965 in their heads. And of course, he points out that that's before the Voting Rights Act, which gave all races in the United States the theoretical equality. So, there is this idea, "Make America Great Again," is this idea that things were at one time better. Somehow.
Yeah, and this idea that whatever Trump does, he's always going to be good for the economy, and that's the difference this time around. Is that as we've discovered this week, with some shocking collapses in consumer confidence in the United States, a big drop in retail sales, and also this concern people are having that America could go into a recession. We've just this week heard from the US Federal Reserve, which has lowered its growth forecasts. And we're seeing, even the US dollar, the mighty US dollar, being dragged lower because of Trump. And that will be interesting to see whether Trump in the long run actually reacts to this fall in the markets, and the fact that his tariffs project, which he's just on a railroad for, is actually hurting the world's largest economy.
Isn't it interesting? Michael says there is no grand plan, that the people who get, the idea that Trump is somehow being driven by a cabal of more intelligent, possibly even more evil right wingers, he reckons is a fantasy. That Trump is just as reactive as he appears. I mean, the other aspect of the book, and in what Michael said, is how important Melania Trump is. She's a kind of ghost-like spectral figure in the campaign. She refused to turn up to any of the campaign events until the very, very last minute. And yet she kind of hangs over there. And according to Michael, she is the only person that Trump truly fears.
Yes. It is just the weirdest thing. It is like the world's biggest soap opera, where the reality is hitting us in all sorts of ways. Yeah,
and we're bit part players in that soap opera.
Well, that's
the other thing, Bernard. Sorry, forgive me for interrupting you, Bernard, but that's the other thing, Bernard. That Michael is not underemphasizing the amount of damage and broken glass that is going, broken glass, broken China, broken everything that there's going to be after this. He just doesn't think it will continue beyond Trump.
Yeah, well, that's the ultimate hope, is that this isn't some sort of turn towards, the future being full of Trump-like populists. The fact that Trump is so unique gives us some hope. But he might live for an awful long time.
Yeah. Well, there's also, just thinking about your comments about the economy and the Federal Reserve and so on, we had the reemergence this week of Kellyanne Conway, his former spokesperson, who, of course, in the first, and who was saying that, the economy's up, inflation's down, egg prices are down, virtually all of which were total bollocks. But, of course, she is the woman who came up with that estimable phrase, alternative facts.
Alternative facts.
But
Yeah.
if you're on the Hoon, you get the real facts.
That's right. And we are full of facts today, and interesting ones. And we'll come back next week with a regular sort of Hoon, where we'll have Robert and Catherine back, we hope. And also, I've had it confirmed today that we'll have Chloe Swarbrick on in the second
Love
half
Chloe.
of the show. So we hope you all enjoyed that unusual version of the Hoon, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Ka kite anō.
Thanks, Bernard. Talk to you soon.